Hey all you whiskey fans. Today we're going to talk about whiskey, but indirectly about whiskey. We're going to talk about stills, but not moonshining stills like this. We're going to talk about Alembic stills and how they came to be and some of the history behind it. So grab a glass and let's talk about it. What's really a sick twist of fate is that stills were actually an Arabic creation. Before then, we were doing really crude methods of still manufacturing. For instance, something like a pot, and you see the condensation that builds up on top and then catching that condensation on the sides. Or natural stills that just because of the internal temperature of a vessel and the external temperature of the vessel were creating condensation. However, they were actually able to figure out what or how to create a still and do some very creative things which still today are being used in whiskey production. Now, by no means do I mean that Alembic stills are the best still and the still that you should always be using. There's a reason that we've gone from that traditional type of still to a still like this here. Very simply put, the benefits of using a still or a newer age still is, the pot is still the pot that's down here, but the longer neck you have, or let's say you have a whiskey dome on top, or the onion on top, all of these things are helpful because they need the whiskey to travel a further distance and become pure, and the ethanol actually to become pure and to be more lightweight, releasing and reducing a lot of the esters and other components which are found in whiskey. So, pros and cons. Pro, you get a more refined, a better whiskey, but the cons are a lot of that flavor might be stripped away and you might be dealing with less of it. So it's up to the distiller to really decide what style they like, but there's a lot of reasons why we went from one to the other. Another reason, you see this very small condenser here. In a lot of Alembic stills, there was a very long condensing hose, and the reason for this being that they were naturally converting or naturally turning the temperature, turning that steam, the ethanol that had evaporated, back into a liquid. And that's why this very long hose was required, because as you can see kind of in my still here, maybe I'll move it a little bit closer, you see these two little barbs on the ends. And these barbs allow you to connect water into the still. So I have cold water going into the bottom and leaving out the top. Meaning that this smaller area can always remain cool and always remain at a very safe temperature first to reduce the vapors down. This also means I'm not losing any alcohol just to the vapors alone, which is a good thing. But also for safety reasons, of course, that steam is incredibly flammable and it would be a bad thing if that caught on fire. Now, I'm going to have to read this because his name is insane, but kind of modern day distilling is very much attributed to a Persian alchemist, Abu Musa Jabir ibn Yahan. This guy was born in 1721 AD, and he did a lot of stuff for distilling. Like most alchemists or at that time, the goal of distilling was not necessarily to make ethanol, but to preserve a spirit or to preserve a beverage, and maybe more famously, to convert that beverage into gold, or that substance into gold. And this is, of course, a lot of the roots of alchemy and how medicine started. Again, part of the roots of why we used to think that alcohol is medicine probably started in the Islamic golden age of medicine, where people were thinking that all these productions were medicine related. What's really funny is, although Jabir blah blah blah, sorry man, distilled and created the first wine-based spirits, he actually noted in his journals that it wasn't actually a useful spirit or useful substance. He mentioned that it's a flammable liquid of almost or little to no use. And oh man, was he wrong. Now, it's also fair to mention he said little to no use, but a great advancement for science. And I would like to say it's a great and very fun use of my time, but also a great extension of science. Because many of you maybe growing up used a Bunsen burner A Bunsen burner is a type of still. Now it's new, it's made of glass, but what were you doing? You were heating up a pot or a liquid and you were extracting different things as they came out of it. Same deal, same concept. So whiskey science, it's a thing. What's really funny is we don't actually know who was the first person to drink this new make of grappa or brandy, this distilled wine. So whoever it was, I mean, cheers to you because you figured something out that's quite amazing. Now, for the person that kind of officially after this after the spirit was distilled or the brandy was distilled and mentioned of little to no use, there was actually a guy who figured out, hey, this is kind of interesting. We can do something with it, and started to distill more and more of a beverage for consumption. His name, again, I'm going to butcher this, so sorry, dude, was Muhammad ibn Zakiri al-Reza. And kind of like on the same scale, he was an alchemist. He was a medicine, he was a doctor, learning medicine and creating these things because they, at this time, really thought it was all medicinal. Or they said they did. So, Mo, for short, and a couple of his alchemist buddies actually wrote the first documented extraction of ethanol, but for medicinal purpose, and others probably. So after this book, a lot changed because quickly a lot of the Middle East figured out, or the Persian Empire at this time figured out, okay, how can I make a spirit? What is it good for? And what are the side effects which I really enjoy? In fact, it kind of grew so quickly and was so interesting for people that it quickly escalated through parts of Asia and the European, let's say, region, specifically Sicily and Italy. Still for medicine, and it was mainly being, or let's say widely taught in a Italian school, in medical school in Salerno, Italy. So still for medicine, but still widely being used. Because it was so popular and useful, of course, this Arabic writing, this Persian writing had to be translated to Latin, and it was there. And roughly 50 to 60 years after the School of Medicine has been distilling it, translated its text, and fine-tuned it, around the 12th century, did the term, or let's say did the use of alcohol for non-medicinal purposes really take off? And this is also where the term aqua vitae came from and started to expand. Now, I've kind of, let's say, dozed off the topic of Alembic Still because Alembic Still, it was important for what it did and how it got us to expand, but it's a still which is not very commonly used. And I think it's not commonly used because the spirits that we have learned to drink and to enjoy today are very different from what was being produced in the past. You have to think now we're very specifically sculpting a flavor profile. Before, the major use or the major time that you had a fermented grain, fruit, whatever it was probably a byproduct or a mistake. And this meant that the spirits that you were distilling were probably not very good. And there's no, or at least none that I could find, mention of double or triple distillation, which is something you'll definitely need to do in such a still. This also took time and was not introduced right away. This meant that you probably had a lot of, hopefully, very slowly distilled spirits. And slow makes sense because if you had too much, again, that long condenser would probably heat up too quickly and you'd just be losing a lot of steam. But your spirit was not going to be good, probably scorched and probably made of who knows what from where and fermented with what from where. No idea. So I'm very happy to say that stills have evolved in good ways. And these ways are not to be kind of taken away from the original, but a ways to kind of figure out, okay, if this was the first still, first creation, how we've come and why we've done the things we've done since then had to be for a reason. And less scorching, I hope, if nothing else, less scorched distillate. So a lot of benefits. That being said, there is still a nostalgia for me in using a older Alembic still. I personally like heavier, grittier whiskeys, and I think for me it means a lot more when you can kind of make a fine spirit, crafted the way you need to, but still with a lot of esters and a very full, oily body and profile. So having a version of Alembic still that might not be so refined like a column still is, but still something which pays homage to the old truth and something that's just a little bit cleaner and handled a little bit better really means a lot. With that, I will say cheers to you. Thank you for sticking around for a long video that kind of went off on a tangent, but I hope you found it interesting. Cheers to you, your next glass of whiskey, no matter what still it came out of. Bye now.